As a former IT infrastructure engineer who was responsible for, amongst other things, cybersecurity infrastructure at various large companies, including some Silicon Valley darlings in the past, and some other large organizations, I feel like I am probably required to comment on the CrowdStrike outage, which caused a bunch of blue screens of death on Microsoft Windows around the world, and everyone is kind of losing their minds. I'm not going to dive too deep into the drama about it. But I saw this and I was just like, oh, whatever. This would have been a Saturday night for me, back in my corporate career. So I'm not particularly worried about this kind of thing. And let me tell you why. Now, what I will say is that, yes, there are a lot of people that are saying the world is clearly dependent upon these fragile links with, single points of failure and huge blast radius and so on and so forth. And yes, this definitely does reveal an overdependence perhaps on a single security provider. CrowdStrike is one of the biggest cybersecurity, web security companies out there. But really, this is a process failure. So this was a really interesting thread where someone was looking at the stack trace and saying, oh, it was a memory problem. And a lot of people some of the Twitter drama, I'll just give you a high level summary. Some of the Twitter drama is saying, oh, it's because of DEI, it's because of women, it's because of Indians. It's people are just blaming each other. This had nothing to do with developers. Code is messy. There are bugs in all code. You just need to make that assumption. What this really was a problem in release cycles and patching policies. As someone who is responsible for this kind of stuff at large organizations where if things go down, you lose millions of dollars per hour, this has to do with the testing cycle that corporations enable, the testing cycle that CrowdStrike enables, and what the cyber how cybersecurity releases their updates. So basically, you don't need to change any systems. This is not a representation of a fundamental flaw in global infrastructure. It doesn't mean that everything is about to be destroyed. This is literally CrowdStrike didn't do their due diligence, which means they need to process improvement, in order to test these things better. But they also need to give more power to corporations to say, hey, because here's what I'm talking about. Whether you're releasing Linux patches or BSD patches or Windows patches, server or application patches, all corporations really need to have a proper testing cycle. And so what I mean by a testing cycle is where you say, okay, all patches come out on, there's Patch Tuesday, which is, the famous Microsoft. They release patches, what is it, on the second Tuesday of the month? Something like that. I'm a little bit rusty. But anyways, so patches are released in known stage cycles. Now, with cybersecurity, you often will have emergency patches, roll-up patches. You'll have zero-day exploit or first-day exploits that you often need to patch very quickly. But having worked closely with cybersecurity departments, what they should be doing is doing investigations when CrowdStrike and other companies release a bulletin, because all of these are released with bulletins. What you might not know is that there's a bulletin system where everyone from the NSA to the CIA to the FBI to all of the companies that run the internet and Microsoft and all of them, they all participate in security bulletins behind the scenes. And so what they should have said is, hey, here's a known patch, here's a known emergency fix. This is what we're doing to release it. Now, what happened was this. What I'm not familiar enough with was this an update to the fundamental driver of CrowdStrike or whatever? I don't really care, because from an IT infrastructure standpoint, you treat all security, all applications with the same scrutiny and due diligence. Because believe it or not, whether it's an operating system update or a security driver update or a system driver update or even just an Oracle update, any update can corrupt your systems. And when you are responsible for all systems like I was, you treat everything as if it could take your systems down, because the best way to avoid late nights is to have really good testing and deployment cycles where you say, hey, CrowdStrike just released an update, so we're going to only put it on the low risk, peripheral laptops, or some of the low risk, non mission critical servers, and give it a week to burn in, to see if anything happens. So let me tell you a story about when I was back at Cisco Systems. The architect on our team was hell bent on being dead current on all patches all the time. This policy caused way more problems than it solved. So one patch cycle. So I had to go in on Sundays, and it was basically an 8-hour affair to patch all of our virtual infrastructure. We were doing the patches, and then suddenly our ESXi servers, which it's a Linux-like operating system, a Unix-like operating system produced by VMware. So ESXi is a hypervisor kind of operating system, and what it did was it started doing purple screen of death. So they had PSOD rather than BSOD, and it turned out there was a known conflict with the hardware that we were running on, and so a kernel created it was like a kernel panic, or it was the operating system killed itself before it got to full kernel panic. My boss at the time said it sounded like kernel anxiety. So this is a very similar kind of bug where basically CrowdStrike caused the equivalent of a kernel panic in Windows, and it axed itself to prevent any problems. So anyways, by trying to stay dead current on all patches and not having a patch cycle, we were in this like long 12-hour Sunday evening of trying to figure out why, after patching our servers, did they all start purple screening and dying. And we didn't have a rollback strategy either. Now, a very similar thing happened again, where we updated all of our storage drivers. And put it this way, when you have 2.5 petabytes worth of data and your servers disconnect from their backend storage, that's bad. So I had to spend a week writing, and this is when I got really good at automation. I had to spend a week writing automation scripts to update our drivers on the hypervisor, to update the firmware on the underlying hardware running all of our servers, update the firmware on our storage arrays, and then reboot everything several times. And I automated all of it. And once I got all the automation done, I let it run overnight, and it took about 8 to 10 hours, and it patched our entire environment. But yeah, so having learned the hard way and having had some very, very long weeks and very long nights, as a responsible infrastructure engineer, you don't let anything go out the door without a full testing cycle. And so, like, how did this create a global outage? Probably a bad policy a bad default policy in CrowdStrike, if I had to guess. If I were responsible for this, and I guarantee you there are a bunch of CTOs and IT departments saying, how can we prevent this from happening again? Because we can't trust the vendor. I cannot tell you how many times in any corporation, whether you're in technology, finance, whatever, because like I used to work at a big hospital too. Hospitals cannot tolerate this kind of thing. Airlines cannot tolerate this kind of thing. All of them are going to be having conversations. We can't trust CrowdStrike. Who else can't we trust? How do we protect ourselves? And the number one thing is you uncheck that automatically install all updates box, and you say, we're going to do a testing cycle. So I'm not worried about this. This is just representative of a very, very typical IT failure. It's horribly embarrassing for CrowdStrike, but like there's lots that every corporation can do to prevent this from impacting them in the future. Because guess what? If it's not CrowdStrike, it's going to be some other vendor. Someone else in the future hits a dumb button and accidentally pushes an update, but they should have disabled those automatic updates at their level, and they should take full ownership of those testing cycles. So yeah, like there's a bunch of some of my friends on Twitter, other places, a lot of people losing their minds over this. It's not that big a deal. Like, yes, it revealed a vulnerability, but I got some bad news for you people. Like, every corporation has lots of legacy, lots of technical debt, lots of stuff that is barely running and is just duct taped together. I have not worked at a single company that their IT department was actually well run when I got there. Now, when I was done with it, it was running very smoothly, but I am one of the rare breeds that is like, actually, if things are blowing up in IT, that's a sign that you don't know what you're doing. Try and tell that to a room full of IT engineers, they get really mad at you. Anyways, I'm rambling now. So I'm not worried about CrowdStrike. It is amusing to me as a former infrastructure engineer. I'm like, oh boy, someone's going to have some explaining to do. Glad I'm not him right now. But in terms of mitigation and prevention in the future, has nothing to do with systematic structural weaknesses in the global infrastructure. This has everything to do with bad IT policies. Read ITIL. Like seriously, ITIL. Read it, do it. Best practices will save you so much time and energy and money and embarrassment in the future. That's all I got to say. I'm out.